Hello, hello. Welcome to the Thoughtful Age podcast. And today I have a very interesting guest with me whose name is Dan Shupp, and he's a general manager and fractional CTO. And also, he is for a long time professional in tech. He worked in different companies, different positions, focusing on software development, growing the teams, and making the products and leading the products out to the market. And by considering that huge experience, I think we're going to have an interesting conversation about the tech, innovation, teams, and a lot of interesting stuff. So, Dan, could you please briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dimitro. It's a delight to be here. My name's Dan Shoup. I'm actually from the Bay Area and I live in San Francisco currently. Got a computer science degree in college and then immediately moved abroad. Spent about 15 years in Asia in software development, mostly building teams, especially large consulting shops that built MVPs for Silicon Valley startups. And then about 5 years ago, I moved back to the US to kind of get out to the bleeding edge where all the new work was being done. So I came back to San Francisco and started working for a consultancy called Ardium. And that's where I've been for the past 4 years, doing a mix of fractional CTO work and then organizing and managing delivery across our West Coast projects. And it's been a wonderful ride. I think being back in the Bay Area, especially as the Web3 and AI booms happened, has put me right back at the forefront of the newest technology developments, and I love it.
Absolutely, that sounds exciting. Yeah, definitely. Even though that, like, we feel that market condition is not that great, and the whole economy is kind of either in some kind of crisis or like whatever is stagnating. But what we see on the tech market that like there are innovations are coming out, and they're coming and coming, especially in the AI space and in the uh, like in other industries as well. And speaking of that, over like past 2 decades, you've been involved in bringing products to the market and uh, like leading the development teams as well. And what are some of the essential lessons you learned throughout that journey?
Oh boy, I think I've delivered software projects in a lot of different contexts. I've worked with offshore teams. I've been the offshore team. I've been in fully co-located teams that were already always working out of the same room. Sometimes the teams are distributed or within a large enterprise, and I think the most common thread across all of those is that the better the people doing the work understand why the work wants to be done a certain way, and the more they agree with that understanding, the better they understand
Mm.
it and the more they really feel it, the better the output. And that happens in all functions of a company. It happens at all levels of a company, that why you want to do something a certain way, why quality might be helpful to speed, why approaching a certain user problem for a reason instead of another. These are the things that the more the people doing the work understand,
Mhm.
the better decisions get made at the edges, and the better the quicker, the more automated, the more successful the products wind up becoming. And I see that in engineering crafts, in product work, in design work. All of those different functions have huge roles in making sure that the why of what we're building, the actual problems we're trying to solve and why we want to solve in a certain way, getting those into the hands and minds of the people doing the work leads to huge success every time.
Right, and I can't agree more with that statement. I've also seen the organizations where people were kind of siloed within their like functional realm, or they were just focused on the team, on the work that they are doing, not having the whole picture of the business, not understanding how their day-to-day work impacts the business and their well-being ultimately. Because if the business works well and they're getting a bit of a profit, it means that each particular employee will feel the impact of that on their own either salary or rate increase or whatever. And that's a great perspective. I like it. And when it comes also to a team kind of engagement and building this mission driven culture, uh, and as we are talking about equipping the teams with those like strategic vision, equipping
Mhm.
the teams with all the answers about why we're doing that and what results this is driving. Can you share your experience where this cultural shift directly impacted the success of the product or a company?
Absolutely. I think, especially if we're going to talk about a cultural shift, then if my first answer was about helping people understand why, for cultural shift, I might talk more about the how. Um, Culture to me is the aggregated behaviors of the team as viewed by the team. And when I say team, you could think whole organization, right? Um,
Right,
it's culture has quantitative business outcomes. You know, if we all work together and behave at each other in a certain way, we're going to get a work result, right? And
right,
then also there are qualitative results in how the team feels. How empowered do they feel? How creative do they feel at liberty to be, et cetera. So I think what I find in addressing culture and kind of introducing cultural shifts is by focusing on the work practices, but which could be technical work practices. You know, how do we ship? How do we test? Management practices, like how do we evaluate people on what cadence, and then what does that process look like from the different people's perspectives, or just the processes we follow. Those practices produce behaviors. When we say we're going to work together a certain way, the behaviors that come out of that, and then the emotional impacts they get, that's the thing people feel and identify as culture. So if your meetings stick to an agenda, don't get sidetracked, etc., because of the way you do your work, then culturally everyone is going to feel just generally more focused and have more permission to stay focused and drive people to be focused, right? So
exactly. Yeah.
practices that we follow lead to behaviors that then, if you when I see you behaving to me a certain way, what you're doing shows me the culture. Culture to me is shown and not told. Because if somebody tells me we are a certain way at this firm, great, sounds like a talking head. But when
Yeah.
a manager actually shows me that they are putting time and effort thinking about me and my career, then I believe and trust so much more, right? So I think that the how story that I'll tell is about how did you implement that kind of that kind of behavior shift. Um, I think the biggest leap I ever got from a single kind of cultural innovation happened at my firm in Vietnam. For about 10 years, I had a high end dev shop in Vietnam, mostly building MVPs for Silicon Valley startups. And
Mhm.
but we were based in Vietnam, which didn't have as advanced a technology market. So that was great. I could hire high end engineers because there weren't a lot of high end jobs that were that interesting for an outsourcing heavy destination, right? However, it was a viciously competitive market. People
Mm.
were doubling their salaries within about 9 months sometimes out of
Wow.
college. And if you think back to how long it took you to double your salary after you
Yeah.
graduated from school, for me, that's a 4 or 5. So that one took a little while, right? In
Right.
Vietnam, it was
Yeah.
happening at that time so fast, right? So when we got to about 30 people, we started having poaching problems and turnover problems, right? Because,
Mm.
hey, you level somebody up for a couple of years and you really get them improving, and they're going to be so much more valuable so fast in a competitive market. And we did some basic things. We put in levels and bands, and we even put in a quarterly review system to make sure that we were promoting and adjusting salaries often enough. And we found that those things alone were okay. They were good, but they weren't doing the job. We were still getting people negotiating with us adversarially because
Mm.
they got some kind of offer and they said, great, pay me this, or that's it. And so in introducing bands and levels, the missing piece was that we really needed somebody to work with the staff and show them the company's investment in them just week in, week out. And so the practices that I invested in there were feedback, one-on-ones, and especially coaching and professional development plans. The
Mm.
single most effective thing that I did there was a practice that I encourage everybody to find a way to apply in whatever your work is, which is paring down into your team. Whatever team reports to you, it's almost certain that you have a really solid understanding of how and why that team should work together. And when you pair with them for, like one session a week in whatever the important things are that they're working on, you can level them up in a way that demonstrates your investment and your value to them. I wanted my managers, my first and second line managers, to be doing that consistently with their directs, so that their
Mm.
directs would see the investment and feel their managers kind of investing them on the thesis that if you're getting paid enough that you're not, seriously losing out, and you feel like you're getting more valuable every day, and you feel like you're, attended to and in a comfortable social structure that works for you, you're probably going to be pretty happy. And if you can explain to your mom, who, let's say in Vietnam at the time, most of these engineers were very likely to be the first person in their family to go to college. And they had
Mm.
some expectations on them and their earning
Right.
potential. And you got A's in your CS degree. Why aren't you working for IBM or Intel? What's this company? Dan, who's this Dan guy, right? And we needed those people. We needed our people to be able to explain comfortably to their mom how good it was and why it was so good and why it was going to lead to them making more money in the end, right? So that's a thing that managers have to be working that relationship and helping people and adding context all the way. And I needed to show my managers how to do that. So I paired down with my reports were first and second line managers, and I paired with them for about 6 months on building every one of their professional development plans for their people. We set up a
Mm.
process where I would pair with them to set something up based on what they thought about the person. We'd spend a lot of time articulating in the details specific examples and, really, clear descriptions of what the behaviors had been and why they were good most of the time. And my process of first pairing with the managers, having them pair with their directs to review and refine and add, and then pairing again to review the result and talk about how that was connecting to their overall coaching regimen, that produced results faster than I've ever had one of these things work, right? I think by the end of that 6 month process, we had our managers talking so regularly and talking effectively about how a person's development was being managed, what the steps were, and working with them every week on, great, you need to get this validation of this next thing in order to get a checkbox to get you up to the next level. What's next on the list? And by approaching it kind of like leveling up in a role playing game with really concrete, actionable steps that the manager and the direct could be working on together, it turned it from an adversarial game into a co op game. Instead of it being negotiate money with the foreign boss, now it was play the ladder game, play a co-op game with my manager in order to climb the ladder, and I'm getting feedback and results constantly. Huge change. After that change, we scaled up from maybe 30 people up to about 100 people at our biggest. And the
Mm.
entire time maintained about 20%, 25% turnover relative to the national average. And it was all down to a human, emotional, culturally based practice of having your manager sit with you and actually work with you and think through what your future looked like and what was best for you. And the payoffs were enormous.
That makes sense, and I can easily relate to that as well. Like I see how like engineers who are empowered and when they feel like valued and they feel appreciated, they definitely start to like be more engaged. They like started to see the areas that they can improve, especially when they're getting feedback constantly and when they have a role model to follow, and when someone showing them what to do and there's a clear path for your promotion. You just need to like follow those like practices or just obtain those new skills, and everything is up to you. And when everything is clear and there is no ambiguity, and like all those requirements are no vague and like not like biased, let's say, and not made by just one person that is just analyzing the situation, making decision in their heads. When there is a strict process, when everyone is following, it's just a good place to be. Absolutely, when you know for sure that you're following the rules, you're doing okay, you're doing all right, and because like there are clear expectations for you outlined as well, right? And Like you don't worry anymore about am I like performing enough, like am I having all the right skills in place. And having the system in place, it's absolutely essential for any kind of,
Yeah, absolutely.
not even tech organization, I would say. But
One of the interesting patterns I've found is that in engineering work, we often find that the higher frequency we can get the feedback from our test suite or from our users, the better our product development goes, right?
exactly.
And turns out that same principle of taking the desired outcome, tracking it back to the thing that we did, and then getting feedback on whether that worked, uh, the more frequent we can get that process of human feedback, the better our professional development goes, right? It's for the same reason, right? Smaller bits of feedback, mostly positive checks to validate that to reinforce that you're doing things the right way, results in more effective output in the long term.
You mentioned that that system helped you to scale the organization, right? And what were there any other components, key components to that scaling capability that you've got and those scaling rates you had?
Yeah, I think most of the getting scale and especially doing it in a leveraged way, I find involves finding ways to help people do their work better. Usually,
Mm,
most of the work that you're doing to get scale, especially as you get up into the tens and the dozens of teams, is um, technical practices that enable people to work better. We see these in infrastructure all the time, right? If you have self-serve environments and a really nice automated deployment system, and a really at a decent, doesn't even have to be super stable, just a reasonably
yeah,
stable, only somewhat
yeah,
flaky test
yeah.
suite, you are now unlocked to develop so much more quickly and easily because you can get immediate feedback on whether anything you're doing has affected anything.
And you even enjoy this work because you don't need to deal with like some
Completely.
creepy scripts that like just doesn't work and you need to
Yeah.
fix them.
I mean, the if I ship something and then I can't see it in the product, or I never see it in the product because I'm not, because it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get through a release train or something, and then I'm not, then I just don't get the same payoff anymore, right? People like seeing the results of their work, the end results in front of the user as regularly as possible, right? It feels good to know that the stuff you're doing is actually getting out there and having value. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I think
absolutely.
that when I look at the things I focus on for scale in technical disciplines are usually things like that. What can we do to make devs lives easier, make it as simple as possible for them to show up, pull in a standard practice, start doing some work, validate, and get going, right? It like I like to have people shipping code in the first week that they show up, right? Um,
Makes sense. Makes sense.
and
You just placed him in the proper location, and
totally,
they
totally.
know exactly what to do, and they have all the tools, and they just not looking around for some. Oh, how can I start the app? How can I set up the environment? How like can I get access and so on?
and and I think ultimately what we see there is that the really highly leveraged things that unlock scale and empower things, a lot of them are infrastructural operational activities, almost like
Right.
DevOps activities are the ones that unlock fast development at scale. Product ops activities, and when I say product ops is its own term nowadays, so let me be a little more clear. Um, Lumping in product management and TPM style work, their
Hmm.
organizational effectiveness, operational leverage is another word for it, often comes from the practices that they're modeling. Because they run the meetings, they're setting the prioritization, they're governing the decision making frameworks. And if the operations of that decision making framework are clean, understood, people know how they're supposed to walk in, they're consistently getting aligned on whether the thought process they're following follows the decision framework or not. That's really essential work of product managers and TPMs up and down the stack. And the more they are setting a good model and the more they're setting other people up to have really easy interfaces with design reviews, with architectural decision processes, those kinds of
Hmm.
things, the better participation they're going to get, right? And it really like that's the thing that enables people at the bottom to act in a synergized way, and that's what you're looking for with scale. I think that,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's like pretty fair assessment. I can't agree more. That all of those practices definitely helps to speed up the processes and
Mhm.
align the teams and between each other and between the business goals as well. And moving forward, at Artium, you help teams operate like Silicon Valley's best, and like I believe some of those practices that you just described are helping in your like consultancy practices and helps transform your clients as well. Uh, like, can you elaborate on that a bit? Like how clients are leveraging from what
Yeah,
you're doing?
absolutely. For background, Artium is a consultancy that runs transformative software projects for our company, for our clients. What does transformative mean there? Um, we will usually take our balanced teams of folks and pair them in with our clients in order to build software together. Our clients are usually people for whom custom software development is a big differentiator for them. They're usually tech first companies in different ways. And our consulting style is that we want to work with them and help them achieve their business outcomes, give them the capabilities they need at the same time to continue achieving those outcomes after we're gone. So we're looking for more of a, I would say, management consulting style transformation as a result of us embedding our teams with the client and shipping code together over the courses of weeks and months.
Hmm.
Our
Nice.
approach is that most of the learning and most of the behavior change and implementation of new practices happens once the individual executors are bought into the change and want to change and are excited for it, right? So when we get brought in order to deliver some important code, bring some important projects forward a few quarters, or level up the team, it's really important to us that we show up and do the work together with the team, starting meeting them where they're at without trying to show up as experts or as people telling them, the golden way. Instead, we're looking to pair with them directly, do the work together, understand their context and how they got there. And then after we've established some positive track record and ability to do the work with them together, now we're, brothers and sisters in the foxhole together, solving the problems together, again, playing a co-op game against whatever the client's business problems are. And at that point now, we're all in the same team. And have you tried this way ever? What do you want to try it that way and see if it works? We'll just see what happens. And that kind of open, generative, experiment oriented approach down in the details of the technical practices we're suggesting or the rituals that we're
Hmm.
suggesting. If we show up and are doing the work well alongside people and are wonderful people while we do it, we see a much stronger adoption of the practice changes because people realize that we're all on the same team together.
I see. So you just don't come to the people or to the management of the company and don't give them a lecture on the best practices, and they look at you and like, yeah, yeah, tell me more. I've heard that stuff a lot, but like when you offer them just to show how it works, like engaging your own team and showing your like all the best that you have and
Absolutely.
applying the expertise you have to their projects and their pains. By the way, uh, what kind of pain points leads your customer to come to you? Like, would they think, "Oh, we have a low quality or we have a slow delivery"? What are those main like pains that they are trying to engage with you with?
Um, Usually, customers are coming with a combination of a set of pain points and a really important opportunity. Um, Often, people, aren't as interested in going to the doctor or getting help until a really
Exactly.
important reason for them to do
That's
so,
what.
right?
Yeah.
And so often we're getting brought in by, let's call it a Series A company that has product market fit with their existing product and they're scaling up and working against that. And they just have another $10 million opportunity over there. And that could be $100 million opportunity maybe, but they've already got this big thing that they're scaling on right now, and they don't have the people to take off of the main thing for this hypothetical other opportunity. Maybe they see a B2B version of their B2C product and they're, boy, that would be
Mhm.
kind of an effort to change the architecture of everything and respin this product out while we're still scaling up the B2C. So we might get brought in to grab a couple of SMEs from their team and then spin up a development team to prove out that product. And maybe 3 or 6 months later, once they've established that that is a really valid thing, we've got a pilot working with a client. This thing has legs. Then we'll work with them to build a team around the people who have been driving it so far, which would have been a mix of our folks and the client's
Mm.
folks.
Mm.
So
Yeah, good
then
model.
that Series A company, once they've established that they have a second product or a second opportunity to go after, and that it's really now we have to start working with them on great. How do we get both of these organizations working together on a common code base? Given that now we have two big products that we're working out of, right? So often
Mm.
clients are coming to us with a team that's executing pretty well to have gotten them to the current place. And they have opportunities that they would need to level up in ways that they don't have the time to invest in right now in order to capture that second one. And we can add those capabilities with our people um, as soon as we land, and then help the client build those capabilities as they develop the business case and understand that it needs to be a long-term part of their organization.
Mm. I see. Yeah, like very appealing model is to me. And uh, as we are speaking about like different models and maybe different cultures as well, you worked in Asia, as you mentioned, in Vietnam, and had an opportunity to work with people like operating maybe on different values and on different principles.
Mm-hmm.
And and now you probably have a better understanding how different cultures and languages like can influence the final outcomes as well. And did it have any impact on your approach to tech and leadership?
Absolutely. I think like a lot of learning processes, I learned a lot that was very important very quickly, and then had to spend a longer time unwinding that and refining that to get a more holistic view, especially with international cultural concerns. Right. I think if you talk to me in the first 6 months of me moving abroad, I would have been the best tour guide you ever saw. I could tell you everything about why this thing worked the way it was, how these things interesting facts all the time. And but then fast forward maybe 4 years in, um, I couldn't tell you very much at all, because once you really have lived someplace, you see the actual variability of an entire country's worth of people, an entire culture's worth of practices. And you realize that actually the differences from one culture to another are way, way smaller than the differences
Mm.
between one person and another within a culture or across a culture, right? I think
Right.
what effectively, no matter what culture you're in, you have similar distributions of personal values and approaches and desires and, senses of humor. And those distributions, you tend to find those kinds of people in every culture, right? So for
Mm.
me, I'm looking for a certain type of person with a certain attitude that's going to be my teammate and work together with me, just because of the way I like to work, because the way I like to get results, right? And I can find those people in San Francisco. I can find them in Saigon. I can find them in Beijing. And the cultural differences between those places are fundamental, very important, and very fun to learn and kind of learn to work within. But the cultural practices are still a window, and you want to see who the person is underneath. Whether a person
Mm.
is a high trust individual, whether they have the same values as you do or as your team does, whether they have the same approach. Those are things that exist kind of deeper than the culture that somebody grew up in most
All
of the
right.
time.
Yeah.
And so, you get, even if you're in Germany where, and everybody's on time, or actually where on time means early, where on time means 5 minutes early, right? Um,
Right.
you will still find plenty of people who do or don't fit the teams that work best for you. And that
Mm.
ultimately understanding what drives people, what their motivations are, what their values are, is more important to finding your people than picking the culture that they come from or operating in any particular culture by itself.
I see. Yeah, and I like the metaphors you used. Like the culture is just a window that we can just look inside and like see the person itself with their own like character, with their own temper and
Absolutely, absolutely,
values. And because I can imagine that like basic values are common among humans, right? Some like attitude towards our other person, attitudes to the self, self
Mhm.
growth, and reliability, and loyalty, and all that stuff that might be pretty common among all of us. And
Completely.
this is pretty fascinating.
I have a fun story on that topic. When I lived in Vietnam, I was part of one of the first kind of big agile software development organizations, like community organizations pushing agile software development. It's called Agile Vietnam, and what I found was that in talking about Scrum and XP and Agile generally across Vietnam, the general attitude was based on their experience. That almost all of the work, software development work that had gone to Vietnam for 20 years at that point, had been somewhat lower value outsourcing work, right? Vietnam
Right.
was somebody's India plus one strategy. And
Yeah.
so you would talk to people who hadn't experienced working in a high frequency, high feedback, conversationally oriented, agile environment. And they would consistently tell you, they being Vietnamese engineers that I met out while I was out there, would consistently talk about how, for cultural reasons, Vietnam was not an appropriate place to do agile software development. That
Interesting.
the school system, the way people were educated, the thought processes, the types of work they got, the cultures that developed from that, all of those things really prevented Vietnamese, engineers from being able to work in an agile context. Fundamentally, that was their attitude. It wouldn't work here because it hasn't worked in the past. In the meantime, me and my cohorts had, hundreds of people working for us who were very happily practicing agile. And guess what? Guess where they were all from, right? Um, it actually, it was perceived as a cultural truth that we just don't work this way by definition because we, on average, don't. And yet, as soon as people got into the flow of it and saw how they could participate and understood the core idea that, hey, we as the team, we can improve the way we operate. It's in our power. We can take the reins and make our lives better and make it easier to ship code around here. Once people had kind of internalized that idea, great. Now they're agile. They're doing retros every day and improving, um, it took the shift from a couple of us people with overseas experience talking about it and telling our stories to us developing local people who could then tell
Mm,
their stories more broadly. It took us a couple of years to kind of shift the conversation from foreign experts giving the knowledge to local practitioners showing what had worked. And once we were able to hit that, suddenly Vietnam developed a much stronger culture of agile software development. And now I would say it's as much of a standard in Vietnam as it is in the US, meaning similar percentages of people are practicing this, especially within product development companies.
awesome. It sounds like that organization that you are part of contributed a lot to that shift as well. And this is very impressive. And I like I always like to hear these stories how like some subtle shift that you introduce in some industry then is growing beyond that area that you were about to do that, and then it shifts the whole industry and the industry of the whole region, let's say, or the whole country. And speaking of that, and giving your vast experience across different tech companies and different roles, and with everything what is going on the market now, what emerging technologies or trends do you believe will shape the future of the tech industry? Of course, there is AI now, which is on everybody's like radar, but maybe there is anything else you also observe as something that has a big potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this country, this question should have two versions of it. You're allowed to talk about AI once, and then you need to answer it again, and you're not allowed to say AI.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think the AI version, the AI answer, here is I think the part I would say right now today, people can see that LLMs, especially with generative AI, that there are certain use cases that are game ready right now. We should be building summarization based use cases into our products right now. And
Right.
we should also be building them into our internal company practices because, boy, no technology has made me so excited to since the wiki. And the wiki, when it came out, made everybody feel like suddenly we're going to finally beat this organizational communication problem. It didn't.
Yeah.
It turns out that it wasn't enough, and now everybody is
Yeah.
kind of griping about their wiki all the time, or their Confluence, or their Notion. And this is the next one. The power of LLMs to summarize has huge potential for operational leverage by making cross pollination much simpler, and by the more we can automatically generate valuable summaries and put them in a source of truth for people to look at, then the more that will train people to go and look at the source of truth for an answer to their question. And that is how you get leverage across multiple teams and dozens of pods and so on. When people
Yeah, the
all
efficiency
understand
will
that these
grow.
things play. Yeah,
Efficiency will just grow dramatically. I can imagine instead of waiting from someone to give you an answer to your question, or like spending hours digging into all those old Confluence pages, trying to understand what is relevant, what is up to date. You just like get an answer instantly from that model that has all up to
yeah.
date information.
Yeah, so I'm most excited. I think there's the most business potential on just sitting on the table right now around summarization into existing enterprise products. Um, I think there's a longer term benefit as people develop their individual skills in using AI tools to speed up their own internal processes. I think this is a known fact, but I'm especially interested in. Um, there's a pattern with any kind of writing, but especially software engineering, let's say, where the way a junior person writes is not as effective as the way a senior person writes. The
Yeah,
more experienced a writer is, the more they're able to understand ahead of time what the goals are, why they're trying to do something a certain way, who the audience is, and then the more they're able to chunk out what they're doing in a structured way, right? In the same way that a junior engineer might pull a ticket out of the backlog and then say, great, I know how to do this, and then write the entire solution and then ship it and start clicking it around. And that's the way they test, right? That way of programming doesn't get as much benefit from LLMs and from generative AI, right? If that person uses Copilot and they can generate their code twice as fast, great. They still generated a whole bunch of code with no idea whether it works. And they generated all that code with no idea of how to isolate the different functions that they're trying to develop and, make sure that one is working while you try and develop against another. They don't have that built into their practice yet, right? So because of that, they will have the same issues later on that they always would have, where their code has hidden, that it wasn't fully tested, doesn't have great test coverage. They, kind of put some of that stuff in after the fact. All of these junior engineer issues are going to have costs later on still, even when that person is accelerated by AI. So what I'm
yeah,
really interested in, where I'm focusing right now, is what are the senior practices that engineers use, that PMs use, that designers use? How do they process their work differently, and how does AI affect that? And the answer seems to be that the more senior person, the more senior engineer, takes a ticket off the backlog, looks at the outcome they want, writes a test for that, for that, then writes some code, sees if it passed, and they work through the entire ticket in a pretty steady, outcome oriented, high frequency validation fashion, right? If you inject AI tools into that process and start having Copilot support you with defining tests, or support you with generating code, or support you with thinking through what the edge cases might be for the thing you're working, then you'll be asking the LLMs to give you much finer outputs for you to review and decide whether they're correct. And it's going to be easier than trying to evaluate, a couple of methods at once that it all generated together. So what we're finding is that by pulling AI in a way that supports more advanced processes, you get correspondingly much more bang for your buck from the AI. And that senior people following iterative outcome driven practices for how they develop code or write their documents, that they're getting more benefit from AI because it's easier and more effective to use AI within a tighter, more prescriptive, outcome driven writing style.
Yeah, yeah, that all makes sense. And I'm pretty optimistic as well about all that development and really looking forward to seeing more like real applications of these LLM models in different like areas, different industries, in all areas of our life, I can imagine. And as we are coming to the end of our conversation today, I have the last question for you. For those looking to start their own company or own to start developing their own product or bring a software to the market, what advice and insights can you offer based on your journey?
Uh, I would say build something fun as soon as you can. Um, when you're looking to think through a product or bring something to market, um, the there's often a tendency to try and analyze through and make a really good decision and have a great idea that's going to have and that to me, the idea of having a perfect idea that you need to refine before you can show it to me is very similar to the ideas of, oh, I have to design this whole thing up front before I can code any
Mm,
of it, or
yeah,
this thing needs to be perfect before I can let it out the door, right? And when you're building your own products, the perfection of the product is something that comes out of the team and the way your team works together. And so for me, finding people that you work well together who have a similar goal and are going to be great people for you to work with. Test that first. Find some people that you enjoy working with. Try working with them. Doesn't have to be perfectly related to the tech idea of your dreams, but if you can find partners who share the same goals and have the same values in building these companies as you, now you're on the right track, and the right team will find a product much more reliably than you and your great product idea will get out and lead. So all the same recommendations apply. I think that I would give to anybody around be lean with how you're testing and validating your products for sure. But
right.
but do that by building something with some teammates that actually works. Validate that you have a group of people that you are ready to, vastly overcommit alongside for the next couple of years of your life.
Exactly. No, I love it, and because ultimately it's the people who build the product, and not the product which builds people. So, Dan Troop, thank you so much for joining me today, and I believe it was very interesting and insightful conversation.
Dimitri,
Have
it
a
was a
good
pleasure.
rest of
Thank you so much.
have a good rest of your day. Bye.